Good morning, everyone. This live webinar will be recorded, so if anyone has any questions during the presentation, please use the question button or put it in the chat and we'll be answering it at the end. We'll have time to get to everyone's question. We're pleased today to welcome Justin Kander, a Master of Science, founder of CannabisDeclaration.com, an internationally recognized educator and researcher in the field of medicinal cannabis and the endocannabinoid system. For more than 17 years, Justin has dedicated his work to researching the therapeutic potential of cannabis, with particular focus on cancer and the endocannabinoid system and patient-reported outcomes. He has authored multiple books, including Cannabis for the Treatment of Cancer, Enhancing Your Endocannabinoid System, and the comprehensive report on cannabis extract movement, which compiles thousands of published studies with real-world patient experiences. Justin has presented at numerous international conferences on medical cannabis and has spent years helping clinicians, patients, and the broader community better understand the science behind the endocannabinoid system and its role in human health. In today's presentation, Unlocking the Endocannabinoid System, a hidden key to human health, Justin will explore the discovery of the endocannabinoid system, its role in maintaining homeostasis across the body, and the emerging research on how cannabis may influence health and disease. With the current debates surrounding medicinal cannabis reform in New South Wales and around Australia, this promises to be a very informative session. Please welcome Justin. Thanks, Justin.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be able to share this information with everybody. The endocannabinoid system is way too under recognized in both the medical and lay communities, and it's going to be like discovering the nervous system or the cardiovascular system. This is so critical to human health, and modulating it through cannabis and non-cannabis approaches is going to be a really big component of the future of medicine. So getting started, I'm not going to go too deep into this introductory slide, but it just is really good for showing the complexity of the endocannabinoid system, all of the proteins and fats that are going into it, and the phytocannabinoids or plant-based cannabinoids from cannabis that influence different receptors that are part of the system. But I'm going to get a lot more specific in these next slides. So let's get started. So what is the endocannabinoid system? Simply, it is a cell signaling system that's found in all mammals. So just like we have neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine that work within the neuronal system, we have the nervous system, we have this ECS system, which is far, far more widespread and is found basically throughout the entire body. So the ECS has the endogenous cannabinoids, the endocannabinoids that all mammals make. It has the cannabinoid receptors that the endocannabinoids bind to on cells across the whole body, and enzymes that both synthesize and degrade the endocannabinoids. And this whole system, the receptors and the cannabinoids themselves, regulate a diverse range of biological processes, including those related to mood, appetite, sleep, the immune system, and more. And as this graphic shows here, it's a distribution of the CB1 and CB2 receptors throughout the body. So as you can see, most major organs and parts of the body have either CB1 or CB2 receptors. So they're very ubiquitous and critical for health. So let's get into some history. Cannabis across the world has actually only been criminalized for about 100 years, where it's been used medicinally for thousands of years otherwise. So in the 1930s, which is also similar to in the United States, cannabis restrictions began in Australia, and cultivation and possession became crimes that were punishable with prison sentences. Thankfully, well, at least in America, things have gotten a bit better, but people still go to jail for simple possession, and that's really messed up. Things really started to change in 1988. So we knew, THC could, get people high. We knew that cannabis was having medical effects, but no one really knew how it was doing what it's doing. So 1988 was a really key year where the first cannabinoid receptor, CB1, was discovered. So they discovered the receptor first. And of course, the scientists are like, this is the receptor for THC, but there must be an endogenous compound we make for the receptor. And indeed, 4 years later, they discovered the first endocannabinoid, which is anandamide. Then just a year later, they found the second cannabinoid receptor, CB2, and 1995, the second endocannabinoid, 2-AG. Now, there are other endocannabinoids as well as endocannabinoid-like molecules that work together with anandamide and 2-AG to provide regulatory functions. But in general, these are the two main receptors and the two main endocannabinoids that the research is focused on tremendously. And then in 2017, medical cannabis was legalized in Australia, sparking a further surge in ECS research and thankfully some, significant patient use in Australia that will hopefully get better over time. All right, now we're getting pretty interesting here. So the nutrients we take in, including proteins, fats, and minerals, are critical to the function of the endocannabinoid system. So the cannabinoid receptors are protein based, so the proteins that we consume ultimately get formed into these CB1 and CB2 receptors. They're also known as 7-transmembrane receptors because you can see, I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but these protein folds go through the membrane 7 times. So they're linked with the cell membranes, and then after activation, a wide variety of downstream signaling molecules are affected that lead to all the effects of the ECS. So it's really what happens after receptor activation where the regulation happens. Then with the endocannabinoids themselves, they're derived both from omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. This is at least one of the reasons why having a good balance of both fatty acids is very critical. And at least in America, the omega-3 consumption is really low, and it's thought to be responsible for a lot of chronic diseases. And this could be, at least in part, because of the lack of the omega-3 based endocannabinoids that are produced. So cannabinoid receptors made largely from proteins, endocannabinoids made largely from those essential fatty acids, and then it results in the endocannabinoids anandamide and 2-AG. And in addition, the micronutrient minerals like calcium, magnesium, and potassium are also relevant to ECS function. So calcium, for example, regulates both neurotransmitter release and the synthesis of endocannabinoids. So when calcium floods into a cell, this activates those synthesizing enzymes like DAGL and NAPLD that produce 2-AG and anandamide specifically. So you need calcium. Likewise, magnesium is important for basically ensuring that the CB1 receptors function optimally and properly. And magnesium deficiency is associated with altered endocannabinoid signaling. So it's not doing what it's supposed to do. And with potassium, that helps maintain the cellular membrane potential. So where the cannabinoid receptors live, it's helping support the proper function of the membrane, and that ultimately influences the proper endocannabinoid release and receptor function. So as a summary, these minerals support optimal receptor function, regulate endocannabinoid system synthesis and release, influence intracellular signaling pathways, which is what happens after the receptors are activated, and maintain neuronal and immune balance. So the ECS began evolving way long ago. It's thought to have began evolving 600 million years ago in a sea sponge called Porifera. So this very, very early evolution did not have the actual endocannabinoids or the receptors themselves, but had endocannabinoid-like molecules where the structure of the molecules is similar to the endocannabinoids. And then as time went on and these various other organisms, basically the receptors and the endocannabinoids as we know them today became found throughout, all vertebrates and a lot of even invertebrate organisms, which shows how critical it is. Every mammal needs an endocannabinoid system. If you don't, if it's blocked or there's issues with it, as studies have shown where you knock out the cannabinoid receptors, with basically you when the function is impaired, then organisms develop disease and don't, function right. So by 200 million years ago, mammals had fully formed endocannabinoid systems. And one key thing is that there's been a conservation of the endocannabinoid system genes across species. So conservation means that the gene is staying the same. It's not genes change over time because something needs to change to help an organism survive. If the gene is being conserved and not changing over a long time, that means it's working really well and doesn't need to change. So the fact that the ECS genes have been conserved across species across a long period of time shows how important they are. And how, once they started working well, there wasn't a need for more evolution. So that's pretty cool. So moving on to some things that the ECS actually does that protects us and ensures health. So it regulates numerous cellular communication processes and prevents cell damage largely via anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects. So after endocannabinoids bind with CB1 or CB2 receptors, a wide variety of downstream effects occur that ultimately benefit overall health. So with inflammation, it's downregulating compounds that basically cause inflammation to get out of control, like tumor necrosis factor alpha and the interleukins 1 beta and 6, so IL-1 beta and IL-6, and that ultimately leads to decreased immune cell activation and infiltration of immune cells into tissues. And chronic inflammation is that underpins so many chronic diseases that being able to attack it at the source is something that could be really, really valuable for medicine as a whole. In addition to chronic inflammation, chronic oxidative stress, where you have these oxidant molecules, largely reactive oxygen species that are essentially stealing electrons from molecules around them and that they don't function right. It basically is thought to underlie a lot of the aging process and disease development processes, these reactive oxygen species. So cannabinoids are shown to both decrease reactive oxygen species at the source, as well as increase our own natural antioxidant defenses. So that includes superoxide dismutase, catalase, and glutathione. Those are our main endogenous antioxidants, and the endocannabinoid system has a role in supporting them. So that ultimately leads to reduced oxidative stress, which is essentially having too much oxidants, not enough antioxidants, and improves the outcome by encouraging healthy cells and tissue production. Next, so this is just another example of how the endocannabinoid system protects against oxidative stress and inflammation with a specific example. So in this study, they showed in an animal model of Parkinson's disease that activating the CB2 receptor had the aforementioned effects. So lowering reactive oxygen species and lipid peroxidation, which is essentially oxidation of fats, lowering the neuroinflammatory markers, so the TNF alpha and interleukin 1 beta I mentioned, as well as inducible nitric oxide synthase, which can be involved in inflammation. And this ultimately leads to preserving the dopamine transmitting neurons, which is thought to be an underlying cause of Parkinson's is the lack of proper dopamine signaling. So ultimately, the result was neuroprotection and improved neurological outcomes. So that's showing that what is theorized at the cellular level is moving to animals, and there's significant human experience suggesting it works in people too. So the endocannabinoid system has a critical role in protecting cells. So when there's an injury, most profoundly demonstrated with traumatic brain injuries, levels of cannabinoid receptors and endocannabinoids are very well demonstrated to increase, and that this increase is linked to the protection of cells. But in addition, the ECS is involved with cellular repair. So there's research showing that injuries ultimately activate the system, so increasing endocannabinoids and receptors, and this promotes the regeneration of neuronal axons. So the axon is the area of the neuron that the signal travels down that ultimately releases neurotransmitters from the axon terminals at the end. So it's a critical part of the neuron, and if you don't have it, then things don't work well. In fact, with multiple sclerosis, the damaging of the axon, specifically the myelin sheath that coats it. So here you can see that myelin sheath, the fatty coating that helps increase the speed of the neuronal transmission. Cannabinoids have been shown to help protect that, and it might be one of the reasons that cannabinoids have been 100% proven to reduce symptoms of MS. Like there's varying levels of evidence, in terms of double-blind placebo-controlled double-blind, placebo-controlled trials, but multiple sclerosis is one where there's, 100% fully proven. Sativex is approved throughout the European Union for it, went through all the phase 3 trials, and this deeper level healing effect might be underlying some of the efficacy. All right, so there's a lot going on here. The ECS's impacts on health systems. So I'll just go through these, and it just shows the importance of how the ECS ties in to all of these other bodily systems that we have. So with the nervous system, and a lot of this I've gone over before, but it regulates neuroinflammation, neuromodulation, and there's even preclinical evidence showing it can help with neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's by clearing the hyperphosphorylated tau proteins and the accumulation of the beta amyloid plaques that accumulate in the brain and are thought to underlie the impaired neurotransmission. So that's largely preclinical, but there's some great people doing work in this field, including Dr. Dustin Sulak, who presented at the recent Australia conference in February. He's had amazing, amazing results using THC and CBD and just completely changing the lives of dementia patients. So that's something that's really important. So specifically, again, it reduces pro-inflammatory compounds like the interleukins, reduces the activation of the nervous system's resident immune cells, the microglia, modulates neurotransmitter release and synaptic plasticity. And in animal models has been shown to have neuroprotective effects in Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Huntington's, and multiple sclerosis. So basically any kind of nervous system issue, significant issue, there may be a role for cannabinoids in at least some people. With the cardiovascular system, cannabinoids have been shown to regulate blood pressure and inflammation, most notably decreasing blood pressure. That's very well demonstrated, as well as decreasing inflammation in the veins themselves and reducing dysfunction of the endothelial cells that line the blood vessels. Next, we have the digestive system. The endocannabinoid system regulates the motility or the movement of food throughout the gastrointestinal tract, gut permeability, and the microbiota. So ultimately, conditions like inflammatory bowel disease, irritable bowel syndrome, both of those, a lot of patients are having incredible results with, and it's all backed up by the preclinical science showing how the ECS modulates motility and secretion, maintains the gut barrier integrity, influences the microbiota composition, and reduces intestinal inflammation. And just one quick note about gut barrier integrity, because that really is so important. If you have a leaky, a non-functioning or impaired function gut barrier, then particles from food can get into the bloodstream and cause significant inflammation and issues. So the ability of the ECS to help maintain that barrier is more important than a lot of people might think. Finally here, on the top at least, with the skeletal system, the ECS has been shown to increase the activity of osteoblasts, which help with bone formation, and decrease the activity of osteoclasts, which are involved with bone breakdown. So ultimately, cannabinoids show a lot of promise for treating skeletal diseases, most notably osteoporosis. And there is a lot of research on CBD specifically helping with improving bone health. So a lot of promise there. So just to summarize, it promotes the osteoblast differentiation and activity, inhibits the osteoclast formation and activity, and supports bone mass and skeletal health. And what I'm really passionate about is the potential of targeting the ECS to treat cancer. There's dozens and dozens of studies showing how both the phytocannabinoids from the cannabis plant and our own endocannabinoids directly kill cancer cells through similar mechanisms. So both the endocannabinoids, mainly anandamide and to some extent 2-AG, activate cannabinoid receptors and ultimately lead to increasing. There's a lot of different pathways, but the ones here are pretty common. The increase in a molecule called ceramide, increase in reactive oxygen species, increase in calcium signaling, and modulation of proteins in the cells that are related to survival. Also, I want to point out this is an example of the intelligence of the ECS, because you might recall a moment ago I said with healthy cells, it decreases reactive oxygen species. So if the cell is healthy, it can fight oxidation, but if it's a cancerous cell, it actually increases oxidation, which is what you want in cancer. So that's pretty cool. And ultimately, the activation of these pathways leads to the induction of apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. So it's something that our body, cells are meant to die at a certain point. You don't want them to live forever. So apoptosis is the natural way for cells to die without causing a bunch of damage to surrounding cells. So cannabinoids kill cancer cells in essentially the most efficient way. Um, and yeah, so preclinical studies demonstrate anti-tumor effects of endocannabinoids in cancers, including glioma, breast, prostate, colon, and leukemia. So when people say that high doses of cannabis, is having an anti-cancer effect, it makes a lot of sense based on what we know about the endocannabinoid system's anti-proliferative effects. So modern applications and regenerative medicine. And this is really important to know that the ECS isn't just supported by cannabis. There's a tremendous research now showing that all kinds of other things either help increase endocannabinoids, increase cannabinoid receptors, or improve their overall function. So with diet, the most well demonstrated relationship was with omega 3s. There's actually a study showing that omega 3 deficiency essentially uncouples the CB1 receptor from the downstream signaling molecules, and it like essentially deactivates it. So if for some people who cannabis doesn't work for, it very well could be an omega 3 deficiency that's underlying that. Um, so omega 3s are critical, as well as fiber and polyphenols that help with overall endocannabinoid production and receptor function. There are certain herbs and botanicals like curcumin from turmeric, resveratrol from grapes, ginger, ashwagandha. These modulate endocannabinoid system activity. Exercise is actually one of the strongest ways to boost the endocannabinoid system. This is like very, very well supported through numerous studies, particularly with cardiovascular aerobic exercise more than weightlifting. Although I'm sure weightlifting has an effect too. But regular exercise has been shown to increase endocannabinoid levels, reduce inflammation, and support mood and neuroplasticity. And then finally, with meditation, any meditation, is one example, but also other mind-body practices like yoga, qigong, and tai chi that can reduce stress and cortisol ultimately can enhance endocannabinoid signaling, and that's part of how they can help promote emotional balance. And yeah, but diet, of all those things, diet, I think is certainly the most powerful and influential since we're constantly eating, and it's the most matter that we put into our body. So 90% of serotonin, which is like one of our key feel good compounds, is in the gut. And so the gut brain axis, like what's going on in our gut, can affect our mental state. So a healthy gut microbiome, having the right balance of bacteria, supports serotonin production, inflammation control, and ECS balance. And the ECS's health does affect the microbiome. There's kind of like a two-way street with that. So you want to, support the microbiome and the ECS at the same time through proper nutrition and fermented foods, probiotics, and the whatnot. And so this gut-brain axis, the nutrients, the microbial metabolites, and the neurotransmitters all work together to influence brain function and mental well-being. So it's a holistic approach. So there's all these, this is it's kind of a summary, but there's all these different ways that the endocannabinoid system can be targeted to help with medicine. So with neuroprotection and repair, the ECS has been shown to reduce neuroinflammation and support the growth of neurons, as well as the plasticity between the communication between neurons, basically strengthening communication where necessary and weakening it where necessary. That might underlie a lot of the effects on PTSD. So there's also tissue regeneration and angiogenesis, which is the growth of new blood vessels. ECS signaling promotes new blood vessel formation and tissue healing. Also, real quick, that's another example where it does the opposite for cancer and inhibits angiogenesis. So pretty intelligent there. Endocannabinoids also influence stem cell survival, proliferation, and differentiation, which may be a mechanism of the tissue regeneration. But when cells go wrong, they are often replaced with stem cells. So that's a really important method of the endocannabinoid system's function. Immune balance is another really strong one since the CB2 receptor is most concentrated on virtually all immune cells. So the ECS it's mainly tamping down. So when the immune system gets out of control, the ECS helps regulate those immune responses and reduce chronic inflammation. As for skin health, the endocannabinoid system supports the reproduction or proliferation of the main skin cells, the keratinocytes, wound healing, and reduces inflammatory skin conditions. And then finally, with cellular homeostasis, so making sure all the proteins and the signaling within the cell is at the right levels. And there are endocannabinoid receptors inside the cells as well as on the outside of cells. So that's good to know. So it helps maintain mitochondrial function, the balance between reducing and oxidative compounds, so the redox balance, and protects cells from oxidative stress. And by supporting the ECS through lifestyle, nutrition, and integrated practices, we can optimize health, enhance mental well-being, and promote the body's natural capacity for healing and regeneration. So, in conclusion, the endocannabinoid system is essential for maintaining balance across multiple body systems, and by understanding it and properly targeting it with the judicious use of cannabinoids and non-cannabinoid approaches alike, we can transform our approach to wellness. And this area over here talks about the different tissues that the cannabinoid receptors are found in and whether they are increased or decreased depending on, or what they do. Like with CB1, it can decrease blood pressure, or depending on the situation, increase or decrease heart rate. But the bottom line is these receptors are involved in, most of our core, processes. Cannabis completely aside, the endocannabinoid system is something that all doctors should know about, and it's amazing medicine has gotten so far with it being almost completely ignored. But as we start to focus on it more, we'll be able, medicine is great for acute conditions. Treating the ECS isn't going to, save you from a car accident, but it's those chronic conditions which medicine has really struggled with. That's where this ECS targeting is really going to come into play, and I think it's going to change medicine. So thank you so much for listening. I noticed it got dark here while I was presenting, so hopefully that wasn't too much of a problem. But the information is probably pretty bright, so hopefully this went pretty well. Thank you so much.
Awesome, Justin. Thank you so much. I think what you've presented there is incredibly important for us. We've been kind of looking into this for a little while now to understand how to better utilize these medicines. And now that you've kind of shown what's happening in between the gaps, I suppose, it's just incredible how much it links into the holistic human health. So thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you. I just switched
Well,
back. It does look like it's decently bright, so that's good. I'm like, it's getting dark. I'm like, whoa, they may not see me like, but the information's what matters, so that's good.
yeah, we can see the slides. What we'll do now is we'll pause the recording.